RK says success in life is 99% luck and 1% pure bloody good luck. And largest markets were Africa and the Middle East, UK. In those countries, their population go to Medina, Makkah, Hajj, they shave. So outside of India, it was that shaving market for the Islamic pilgrimages, which, had the number one demand. Capture and export these monkeys to labs in these countries, and there was a lot of money to be made. It was not a clean business. It was a horrible business. I will not even begin to get into the animal rights issues.
Hi, Namaskar, welcome to another show. I'm joined today by RK Malhotra, who's come out with this fascinating book, Ace of Blades, the life story of the Blade King of India. I remember going through, it comes on your feed naturally on the digital platforms. I found the cover fascinating, and then I saw, okay, oh, this is interesting. Somebody's talking about the blade story of India. And then I started relating, okay, there's this blade, there's this blade, and somebody has written a story on it. And in general, you would expect that kahani hogi, to it's a business poke. It's going to be like, a lot of, how Ray Dalio does it, or, how Bill Gates recommends, or how people in general, startup samajhna hai, so you've got to go through Amazon, Berkshire Hathaway's letters that he's authored over the years, and there's a compilation. But then and I thought, it's not a book. And I happened to go through around 40-50% of the book, and like I was sharing earlier, I want to write a story which is a family story, but it's connected to different episodes that have happened in the last 50-60 years. Weaving it all together is a challenge. And what I've seen, having read the book, that you've done the job remarkably well, because you brought family at the center of it, and done, which you will of course tell me, or your family is going to tell you if you've done justice to all those characters. But कहानी लिखने का तरीका, बताने का तरीका नायाब है, and anybody who will read this book will get to understand both family, how family businesses operate, how it was like operating in 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. This is that early phase in Indian economic history when people were imagining, thinking of building brands. See, Topaz is a well-known name, but आज से 50-60 साल पहले everybody was trying to build brands out of their family names, right? So that's a change that I see, and it was inspiring. There's a man who understood कि एक blade का brand मेरे पास ये है. There's another category उसके लिए मैं ये brand बनाऊंगा. There's another category में उसके लिए ये brand बनाऊंगा. So this is remarkable, the thought process. But then, not really coming from migrate करके आए थे. Your family was in the outskirts of Rawalpindi, and then the whole story. You're now based in California, but the family is in Bombay, and you get to travel to Delhi every now and then. So let's hear from you. Congratulations again for this book. Let's start your story. How did you end up writing this book? What was the build-up? How did this book happen?
Thank you so much for having me on your show, Arjunji. It's a pleasure to be here. Very exciting. And thank you for this wonderful, very insightful question. Kyunki mere liye to, I couldn't write this book without separating family from business. The two are intertwined. The family is the business is the family. That's the world I grew up in. This is what I saw. This is what I experienced. This is what I still experience. So, to the extent where almost any individual in this family organization is not able to have a separate existence, if I may say. And even as I say that, that was something that I, as a human being, rebelled against and created for myself. But then, as I think about it, that was relatively easy, perhaps for me, being female and being a daughter. So, a daughter is naturally, the expectation in a Punjabi family and in a Punjabi business family is for the daughter to marry somebody, on the outside and become part of their family. So anyway, it's just a temporary phase when she is an insider. But these are things that I grew up with, that I thought about, that I had problems with myself. And when I looked at the other family members, I looked at my brothers, the opposite of me, male members, and perhaps, they would have had other lives, better lives, perhaps. Now, it's all subject, right? It's like subjective, I should say. What is better? What is worse? Who is to say what is better or what is worse? They might argue against that, say something different. But let's say they could have had better lives, other lives, if they weren't part of the family business. But there is no way that they could extricate themselves. They were just born into it, thrown into it, didn't have another choice. And I would argue that was the case with every single male member of the Malhotra family at any generational level. RK himself. RK, the protagonist of the story, the Ace of Blades, वो बहुत जवान थे जब वो गए थे पढ़ाई के लिए यूके को लफबरो कॉलेज मैकेनिकल इंजीनियर बनने के लिए, पढ़ने के लिए. और उस वक्त मतलब काफी मौका ही था यूरोप में रहने के लिए. ही हैड वो पढ़ाई यूके में कर रहे थे, फिर उनके बिजनेस कॉन्टैक्ट्स यूरोप में थे, जर्मनी, फ्रांस वगैरह. And he had an opportunity. He was actually poached by Helena Rubinstein, जो उस समय cosmetics queen थी, और ये बड़ी cosmetics empire, उनकी cosmetics empire बढ़ रही थी उस वक्त. Now she had married somebody who had a male grooming business. It was a barber business, male grooming, and she had her eyes on India and the Indian market. और उन्होंने सोचा कि कैसे मैं जाऊँ इंडिया को, बहुत ही बड़ा मार्केट है, बहुत ही मौका है भविष्य में, लेकिन I need somebody local who can help me with that. And she poached RK. And in order to convince RK also to be part of her organization and to help her, she said, I'm going to set you up with this young Spanish lady. She's Miss Spain. Literally to inveigle him, into staying there and with her. Lekin RK was a traditionalist. RK was part of a Punjabi family. His mother said, nothing doing. You're not going to go awry and become a wastrel wahan videsh mein. You come right back. And RK had been influenced, of course, again by family, by his nani. As a young boy, जिन्होंने उनको कहा था कि बेटा जो भी करोगे, जिधर भी जाओगे, आपको जरूर वापस आना है. You must take care of your family. यही करते हैं हम. And he took that very seriously at a subconscious level and at a conscious level. And that's what he did. He came back to build this razor blade business for his family of origin. That became the House of Malhotras.
But how did it start? Before RK, what was happening? Where was the family from?
So the family was from Punjab, Rawalpindi, actually a village outside of Rawalpindi called Peda. There are two sort of, jo aap bol sakte hain, sister villages, Peda and Pond. And the Malhotras came from Peda. H.L. Malhotra's wife, Kaushalya Rani Kapoor, was her name. The Kapoors, they came from Pond, as did the Oberoys of Oberoi Hotels. So it was these two sister villages, and wahan se they went to Rawalpindi, where the three brothers, Pindi Das, KL, these were H.L. Malhotra's elder brothers. So Pindi Das, Kundan Lal, and Harbans Lal. So Pindi Das had set up shops in Rawalpindi. KL and HL came to Calcutta before partition to sort of explore opportunities business-wise and what they could do. At that time, KL was the karta and HL was his younger brother, matlab doing all his work. In RK's words, he said KL was the man of power, he was the karta, HL was his servant. He would just do everything. And KL had entered into business, or into a partnership, I should say, with a lawyer called Shivnath Singh and MS Oberoi from the sister village of Pond. And all three of them had bought shares in the Grand Hotel, Calcutta, which they had gotten for a very economical sum. It was fascinating because there was this lady who basically owned the Grand Hotel. Somehow rats had gotten into the tank and the water was contaminated. So the price had suddenly dropped, and she was desperate to sell this hotel and earn some money. The hotel was being used temporarily as a sort of a dormitory, for army officers and things like that. So at a very nominal price, in teen partners, उन्होंने खरीद लिया, and they became shareholders, three-way shareholders in this hotel. So KL's share was actually under KL's name, not under HL's name, but they were two brothers joined. It was a family. That was the, how things were done in those days. So HL got his early start, doing things for the Grand Hotel. तो उसके बाद, once he broke from KL, he wanted to also run a hospitality business of sort. तो उन्होंने खरीदा in the Lake District of Calcutta rest and recreation centers for the army soldiers. He entered into that business. He quickly got out of that business and started something called Bharat Construction Company to build tents for the British Army. Now, as you can imagine, after World War II, there's not so much demand for tents. So that didn't go anywhere. So RK would say HL was very dynamic. He would dibble dabble in this. He was very dynamic. He would use the word dynamic in English quite a lot. और मैं पूछती रहती थी कि ये dynamic कैसे है? ये भी करता है, वो भी करता है. That sounds like a dilettante. That sounds like he doesn't know what he wants to do. And it wasn't that. That was perhaps a harsh judgment coming from me. But he was trying to figure it out in this sort of post-independent India कि मैं क्या करूँ? परिवार के लिए क्या करूँ? किस तरह की business बनाऊँ? किस तरह से business मैं कैसे बढ़ाऊँ? And his elder son, Ved Prakash, VP, was in Burma. And this was problematic for HL and Mrs. HL, Kaushalya Rani. They thought that he was going waste. In Burma, he was getting involved with music groups. The ऐसे नहीं करते. Malhotras बिल्कुल ऐसे नहीं करते. This is not looked on as something respectable. Anything in entertainment, not respectable.
उस time पे what was family like? उस time पे when the family had moved from Pindi, पेड़ा गांव से जब निकले, Calcutta पहुंचे. Do you think the family had enough means? उससे पहले family कर क्या रही थी? या फिर were they agriculturists or were they traders? What were they doing before they shifted to Calcutta and started making a base there?
They were shopkeepers. Pindidas had, and right through, shops in Rawalpindi. KL and HL started off as young boys sort of helping with that, but then they left to look for this opportunity.
So the idea of building a business or being traders was always there.
Correct.
And they were exploring those opportunities in Calcutta. So they perhaps did not want to stay there also, because actually जहाँ पर भी जाने वो business build करने ही जा रहे हैं.
बिल्कुल.
Which is why somebody went to Burma also.
Exactly. They had moved from Rawalpindi to Calcutta with the idea of exploring something commercial. It wasn't necessarily trading. The idea was to build some kind of business. लेकिन किस तरह की business, that they were trying to figure out. Now, KL was not business minded at all. But what happens in the traditional families, the eldest son is usually the karta, sort of the front facing, if you will. And that was KL. Which is why HL was doing all the operations, doing the work, doing the scouting, ki kya kare hum. Now, HL had married Kaushalya Rani Kapoor, who was wealthy in her own right. So there was a certain amount of money that came from her side of the family to sort of fund his early operations, or help with that. But HL was a very proud man. Punjabi is very proud kind of people. We all know this. So he didn't want this dependency on in-laws' money or certainly on his brother. So he separated from his brother fairly quickly. Also, he began to understand that KL is not very commercial. Ki ghumta firta, he likes to have a good time. So I'm not going to get anywhere with this. His son, VP, had gone to Burma not so much for the purpose of trading or anything like that, but he had gone to explore the local politics, actually. He was potentially interested in it, but this was not fitting well with HL and Mrs. HL, kyunki with the Naxalites, the communist movement, the Japanese infiltration, they were not comfortable with him being there. They said, jaldi wapas aa jao. And the fact that he was also getting involved in these music groups, that the Malhotras looked down upon. So that was another problem. Now, in the meantime, VP had landed on somehow these machine drawings for a razor blade plant. So HL ne kaha, acha, how do we make sense of this? You send these to your elder brother, wo abhi padhai kar raha hai America mein, University of Chicago. This was Surinder Nath, his second son. And he said he'll figure out what to do. So those machine drawings reach SN. SN gives them to his professor. His professor says, there is a company in Connecticut jo ye blades banate hain. They outsource for another company called Gillette, which is a very big brand yahan pe in the US. You go and work for them as a trainee, internship. So this is exactly what SN did. He went to Connecticut. He worked for them. And this was around the time ke RK, Rajinder Kumar, the youngest brother, was getting ready to graduate from St. Paul's Darjeeling and exploring the idea कि मैं भी अभी शायद पढ़ाई करूँगा यहाँ पे या विदेश पे. And HL ने कहा कि आप जाओगे लफबरा कॉलेज यूके में और आप engineering की पढ़ाई करोगे and you are going to become a mechanical engineer and start this business for this family. Matlab, we've started it, but we don't really quite know how to make sense of it क्योंकि घर में mechanical engineer है ही नहीं. So you are going to be that person. And this was essentially the start of the razor blade business by the Malhotras.
My goodness. So it was essentially, so there's Gillette in operation, there's an opportunity that the family saw, और फिर किसी तरह से they decided कि भाई the younger son, भाई जाके आप इस चीज की पढ़ाई करो. But the family had enough means to send their wards for foreign education and things like that. Having known that, what was it like? Is there some sort of a learning for RK when he was in Europe?
So much learning because even though you are right in that the family had some means, HL had accumulated enough money at this point through his ye business, chote mote businesses jo kar raha tha, rag picking and whatever he was doing. But there wasn't enough money. There's never been enough money for as long as I can remember it. There's been money, but never enough. So, yes, story of everybody's lives, exactly. तो उन्होंने कहा RK को और SN को कि you have to find ways to support yourselves and to raise money to build this razor blade business. क्योंकि एक plant शुरू करने से क्या होगा? If we have to build something where we are going to take over the entire market and dominate and control, that means we have to build factories, we have to build multiple plants, we have to build marketing, we have to build sales, distributions. ये सब के लिए तो पैसे ही चाहिए. And he was told, RK was told, RK and SN were both told, at the time there was a big demand from the polio vaccination research centers in Europe, Pfizer labs, and in America, Eli Lilly primarily, and other labs as well, but these two names really stood out. There was a big demand for rhesus monkeys, which only come from India because they were needed in the process of the research. Rhesus monkeys. So there was a big demand to capture and export these monkeys to labs in these countries, and there was a lot of money to be made. It was not a clean business. It was a horrible business. I will not even begin to get into the animal rights issues. And हमारे देश में हम हनुमान भक्त हैं, so you can imagine this is not going to go down well. And invariably, there are reports out there, if you do sort of a deep search, and I had researched this quite a lot, that come April or May, jab summer months set in India, the Indian government would put a stall on the amount of monkeys being exported because it was considered inhumane and animal cruelty for the monkeys to get them to travel in those hot conditions. And so there was a rush in the other months. And the price would go higher, you know. So this was a dirty business. SN didn't want to do it. He got into it and he got out of it fairly quickly. RK was stuck with it. Now, this was at a time that RK was supposed to be studying. He was also working. It was this dirty work. He's also trying to make sense of these machines, how to work them. He's also being poached by Helena Rubinstein, who's saying, come join me in cosmetics. And he is looking at her cosmetics and thinking ki lipstick, powder and paint jo hai, these are weak products. Ghar mein nani dadi, khana banate, that's mixing recipes. Anybody can do that. How am I ever going to have an edge in this? Somebody can take the recipe, wo bhi bana sakte hai. I have to create a product that the next person cannot make. I have to create a product jiska technical advantage sirf mere hi haathon mein hai. And, a competitor cannot come in and outdo me. And through this process, he just zeroed in on this idea of blades. Initially, he wanted to do industrial blades, not razor blades for human consumption and the skin, but industrial blades that are used to cut metals and machinery in factories. But for one reason or the other, that business did not take off as quickly because his family wanted him to focus. His father wanted him to focus on the razor blades. There was a massive market in India. After independence, the only razor blades that were available in India were all foreign brands. There was Gillette, there was Wilkinson Sword, there was Schick, there were other brands, but there was no homegrown Indian blade brand. And this is what the Malhotras wanted to do.
उस time पर one you argued कि कोई Indian brand नहीं था. There were big families in operation उस वक्त. Like there were Tatas who were trying to get their hands on multiple businesses. And there are many families who were trying to, because India was an opportunity. See, in the 1950s, once we had not, this is right before we had taken a total socialist turn.
Correct.
Okay, everything would be nationalized. There was a great opportunity. In the middle of 1940s, many businessmen in India had gotten together to work on the Bombay Plan. The idea was to build industries in India, build opportunity in India. So I understand that there would have been many players who चाह रहे होंगे कि भाई there's market तो खाली है, there's only foreign brands, there's somebody would want to enter. So was that वो एक डर या वो competition या was there no competition at all? What was the story like?
There was competition. There was absolutely competition. आप बिल्कुल सही बात बोल रहे. There was this massive opportunity to build the Indian industry. See, the big industries, Tatas, the government, they were involved. With consumer goods, there was this wide open playing field because the government was not necessarily interested in, neither did they understand how to run a consumer goods business, nor did they want to get into sort of the detail of that. So this was the opportunity that was given to individuals, families, whatever, to private companies. They said, aap badhao, build these Indian brands in the private sector. And then later on, the control we will put there is through the license Raj, But there was a big opportunity. And with a product like blades, itna demand tha because agar soch sakte, then every single Indian man, before he faces the day, needs to shave, right? What higher demand product, could you possibly think of? So the first Indian player in the market was actually Dilip Dhanukar, his father, M.L. Dhanukar. And he came in at that point with his brand was called Hind Blades. And then over the years, other name brands and things like that. So they were the first player actually in the market. And then there were others who were trying.
Where were they based out of?
They were based out of Mumbai.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and then Ripu Daman Bhagat, who was actually the agent for Panama Blades, which was another big brand in India at the time, very well known, much more than the other ones. Wilkinson Sword and all were actually smaller relative. Panama, this German blade was like very big. Ripu Daman Bhagat was the agent, the sales agent for Panama in India. And he was also after the idea of getting a full franchise under his own name. And he was after, Panama, for that. So there was certainly, these were the early competitors. लेकिन Malhotras ने फैसला किया कि हम ही करेंगे. And Malhotras have this mentality which RK very much inherited and promulgated uske baad. You don't just enter a market, you command it from day one, from moment one. So if we are going to do this, there is no other player. They can be there for presence, stand under the shadow of the tree, but we dominate. This is our market. And so they very quickly got into the business and the other players just became inconsequential.
That is how it happened.
That is how it happened.
But what's been the early journey? So soon after he went for his engineering in Europe, he got back. How long after his studies did he get back? Because he was being poached by many players. So he got back when?
Almost immediately, because during his studies, he was being poached. He was sort of working, studying.
What is the year that we're talking about here?
This, we are talking about the late 1950s.
Late 1950s.
Late 1950s. Okay. By the time he got back, it would have been about 57 or so. And he was just full on 57, 58 in those years. Then he's like full on in the business. Building, but also selling monkeys at the same time. Just all of this is happening at the same time. By the very end of the 1950s, 1959, RK has decided कि अभी शादी करने का वक्त आया है. But he seemed to think that his mother was not taking interest in him. His mother was a little bit more obsessed, in RK's view, with the other sons के उनके बच्चे होना चाहिए, अभी बच्चे पैदा करो, ये करो, वो करो. And, she was also obsessed with her daughter. These are all according to RK. तो उन्होंने कहा, he was very friendly with the business families in Calcutta at the time, specifically the Thappars. He had a lot of friends specifically in that family. And through one of them, he had said to him कि Babbu, they used to call him Babbu, कि अभी तो समय हो गया, जल्दी से जल्दी शादी करना चाहिए. So RK got himself engaged to a young lady in Calcutta called Sunita Judge. तो अभी engagement हो गई, वहां से भी problem शुरू हो गई, क्योंकि Mrs. HL कौशल्या रानी जो थी, she had this, कह सकते हैं कि policy, कि अपने daughters-in-law, Malhotra daughters-in-law should be from outstation. They should not be from Calcutta. क्यों? Because Mrs. HL, Kaushalya Rani, was this very strong and sort of dominant woman. And अगर कोई problems हो जाए शादी में, as, हर एक शादी में problems होते रहते हैं, but she wanted to fully dominate and control. She did not want interference from the Samdhis. And if the Samdhis are in Calcutta, then naturally they are going to be right there, defending their daughter or whatever it is. But if they are outside, there's no opportunity for them to show up, or less opportunity. And this was the way she thought. So in RK's words, she did everything she possibly could to mess up his engagement to Sunita Judge, and it broke off. Surely. Next thing he knows, it's now 1960. Actually, it's 1961. And Mrs. HL says to her daughter, sweetie, chalo, abhi aap St. Bede's ja rahe ho, Simla, I'm coming with you. And Mrs. HL shows up in St. Bede's, Simla. This is 1961. And there is Veena Vij, who is a friend of her daughter, sweetie. Veena Vij was 1 year above. Mrs. HL just takes basically one look at her and says, that's it. That is my chosen daughter-in-law. This is RK's wife. Nothing doing. And that was the end of Veena Vijay's college education as well. And in 1962, February, they're married, and that begins, the domestic journey of Veena and RK.
So, but Veena Vij, did she also come from a trader family or a business family?
Not at all. Not at all. Her father worked for the government. He was a civil engineer. Her mother, this is a family of educated people. They believed in education. They believed in women's education. They were very progressive from that point of view. They were staunch Gandhiists, and they were staunch, at that point you could say, nationalists, believing in sort of this new India, building this new India, a Swadeshi movement. So from that point of view, but they were not business people. They were not traders. They were not commercial by any stretch of the imagination. And my nani, Veena's mother, did not like the Malhotras or what they stood for. Or kehti rehti thi for years. She said, I oppose this marriage. I did not like their values. I did not want my daughter married into that family. I cried for days. And I remember asking her year after year, how did your husband, how did my Nanaji allow it? Because he was a man who really believed in education. I'm a writer because of his influence on me, and he believed, just as a quick segue, that one of his two granddaughters, myself or my cousin, Divya, he said to both of us, one of you needs to become the Prime Minister of this country, like Indira Gandhi. I think, unfortunately, we both really let him down. So we let him down big time on that. But so I said, how did he possibly, let his daughter marry into this family? And the story is that when he met RK, this potential son-in-law, he found something different in him. And unhone kaha, nahi, ye to alag hai. He is going to take care of my daughter. He's going to make something of himself. He's different. He's not like them. And that's how that happened. But it was a big sore point, Arjun, kyunke 1962 February, they were married. March, May or April, May were the exam time, and Veena was supposed to take her BA exam. And she had dreams of taking this exam and joining the IFS, the Indian Foreign Service. This was her dream. The day after her marriage, her mother-in-law said, no need for you to take any exams. You are now a Malhotra Bahu. And even though she had promised Mr. G.K. Vij, her Sandhi, that she would definitely allow Veena to take her exams, that fell by the wayside. And it's something that scarred Veena for the rest of her life.
My goodness. I happen to, in extended family, I happen to know a few Vijayas who are from Simla. But interesting story there. But then, how was RK's relationship with Veena? Because it just often happens that a woman at that young an age, if she's, stopped from doing that she had already imagined, what her family value system had taught her, and she's just, right after marriage, she's told, "Bhai, not a chance." We've spoken about a resentment, but in the age that we are in the 21st century, that resentment often, balloons or turns into a volcano. How was Veena's relationship with RK or the extended family?
So it's really, really interesting. Veena, if I'm to talk about her, she had, in St. Bede's, Simla Women's College, just about come into her own. She was always a very promising student and things like that. For a time, she was in Sanar, and then she was also in girls' schools. But, in this women's college, she had really come into her own. And she and Leela Kak, a friend of hers, these were estimated to be the two top students of that year who would have the top marks. And that really gave her this boost of confidence, and she had big dreams for her life. But then she was caught at a time where she was still fairly young, fairly naive, thrown into this business family where she's suddenly told to be not just the Bahu, but the youngest Bahu. So dominated not just by the mother-in-law, but also by the elder two sisters-in-law, specifically the eldest sister-in-law, who to establish her own dominance as the eldest daughter-in-law would really be very sycophantic to the mother-in-law and give the other two daughters-in-law a relatively hard time. Politics in the kitchen in a Punjabi household. So Veena, this was a shock to her system. And coming to Calcutta was a shock to her system because it was so free and laissez-faire with the art scene and that kind of thing, something that she wasn't used to. She came from quite a conservative background. I've written another book about Jallianwala Bagh, and it's a historical fiction love story. And she said to me, over the years and recently when the book came out, she said, I've spent all this time in Amritsar because, we had our family home there. Of course, she was in boarding school, but, coming back home. But I never saw Jallianwala Bagh because we were never allowed out of the house. And we were told, agar, ladki log udhar jaye, there are all these like wayfaring characters, they can attack you and, eve tease you. And we were never allowed out. So can you believe it? All these years I've de facto grown up and I haven't seen these sites that you've written about and people talk about and people come from far and wide in India and Videsh se bhi dekhne ke liye. So it was that kind of family that she came from. But she very, very quickly sort of assimilated into the role of the Malhotra Bahu because she had no other choice. Now, RK, this dynamic young man who she was married to, he was handsome and he, showed promise in building business. But he was a bipolar man. You didn't know it at the time and arguably you didn't know it for a lot of his life, meaning the word bipolar was not used or diagnosis nahi tha. But if you study what goes into that mental health issue. And if you look at the mental health issues of these family members, they are very clearly there, starting with Kaushalya Rani, Veena would argue. Because Veena would use the term histrionics. She would have these histrionics. मैं पूछती रहती थी ये histrionics क्या है, but very sort of dramatic sort of temper tantrums. And she says that trait carried down through these sons and you could see them in the DNA, in the different generations. Now, people don't like to say this. This is a point of shame. कि हम ऐसे, मुंह कैसे दिखा सकते हैं, पूरी दुनिया को. This is not what we want to show the world. But Veena was dealing with this. And there's a horrible story, and it's in the book about, when she was on her honeymoon. She had just about gotten married and wealthy family. Father-in-law had bought them a ticket to a cruise, which was starting from Singapore, and going to various places. Lekin he landed up in Singapore also. What kind of honeymoon is that? The father-in-law is showing up, but still. So they spent time with him, and then when he left and the cruise started, ek din tha ke there was a movie theater on the cruise, and Veena had bought tickets for she and RK to go and see this movie. So RK was, for some reason, was in a bad mood. He was feeling tired. He had talked with, he had made a trunk call or received a trunk call to his brother, and his brother was messing around with the blades, doing something RK didn't agree with. So he was generally in a bad mood. And he said, I don't want to see this movie. Mujhe bas neend karna hai. Just forget it. We're not going to the theater. So Veena ne unko kaha, they were newly married, right? So this is honeymoon, right after their wedding. Veena ne kaha tha कि चलो ठीक है, मैं cinema को बस जाकर बताती हूँ कि we're not coming, so those 2 tickets can go to somebody else. And RK ne kaha unko कि नहीं, no need to do that. No need. They'll get rid of the tickets. And he went off to sleep in the cabin, in the ship's cabin. Now Veena comes from an environment कि I don't want these 2 tickets to go waste. कि हम अगर नहीं ले रहे ये सीट तो दूसरे कोई बंदे मतलब वो फिल कर सकते सीट. So I must tell the cinema ताकि they're not waiting for us and these seats don't go waste. This is the kind of thinking that she has, the kind of background that she's coming from. So she went down. By the time she came back, RK was awake, livid, angry. कि where are you? She said, Bas, I just went. I told you not to go. He was angry and he gave her a whack. This is a honeymoon. And she was so shocked. But for him, it was this lack of control. He was coming from a system where he had newly come from Europe, come back to India. He was gallivanting with, these beautiful women. It was a shock to his system also to suddenly be married to somebody so beautiful that his psychological fear was that, guys are going to be after her. And how am I going to deal with that? So the control factor was there from the get-go. And bipolar man, he didn't know how to handle it. There may have been no malicious intent, but thadak.
You may have little idea about it also.
It's the start of their marriage. And this is the kind of volatile relationship, volcanic relationship that you saw between the two of them over the years. But Veena took control. She took control. She dealt with this man. She dealt with his mannerisms. She dealt with his family. She became the matriarch. She became the force behind RK, the wind beneath his wings. And she became RK's best friend. And she was the rock and the person that RK would turn to at every stage of his extremely conflict-ridden life. Conflict day in, day out, month in, month out, season in, season out, every day, every moment.
Why do you say so?
Because he had conflict with his family of origin. In business families, things invariably go that way.
No, which is what I wanted to get into it, because here you're telling me that, see, RK is the youngest son. Veena just got married into the family. RK is starting a business. There's competition from the other sisters-in-law. Then, of course, RK also has some necessary wanted or unwanted competition with the brothers or in the family, because he's trying to make a name or a different thing for himself. And while he's at it, there's always this pressure of the elders in the family that he has to take control of. Naturally, even if he takes first step, it'll come down to कि ये तो वीना की नजर पड़ गई या वीना जी के आने की वजह से ऐसा हो गया है, बदल गया है लड़का है, all those things. Amidst all of it, I understand there's going to be perhaps a lot of family turmoil. What I want to understand from you कि उस दौर में फिर how did, of course, see, Veena ji, I'm sure managed it fairly, because none of these businesses or family businesses prosper until the man and the woman, the husband and wife, they come together, they join forces, they build it together, because without it, there's not a chance. Because the family, very often, it's the woman who takes care and ensures that the family, the environment at home stays at peace, so that the man can then go out and work. Right? There are many people, we are talking about in 2026, there are many people who may not agree with this opinion, but around 60, 70 years ago, this is exactly how gender divided roles would operate. The male would not be able to perform in his work area or in his factory or in business if he's not able to find comfort at home. Mm-hmm. Who's going to ensure comfort at home? The female or the woman or the wife is going to ensure that comfort. So how was this playing out back in the day, 60s, 70s they were talking about? We've come in early 60s now. What was happening? Because RK is back, he's married, he's understood the machines, he's understood the market, he's understanding that there's an immense opportunity, but he also has a clear sense of that in order to build and operate this bigger system, he has to build a team, he has to have salespeople, finance, operations, marketing, etc., etc. And that is going to be his mainstay for the next 4 or 5 decades. Also recollecting that it was a time when soon enough, the mid-60s, operating businesses in India was started to get difficult. So there's pressure from the government coming in. Then perhaps, I'm assuming there's pressure from family also coming in. And there's also this pressure of maintaining that facade that, we're a big happy family. So how was that operating for, RK? It's a long question, isn't it? It's like a story that you're narrating.
And I feel like in many ways you've already written the book. You know it. And actually that's something to stress upon, because all of us Punjabis who live this, we've lived this experience. I've put it in a book, but this is a very common thread, you know. So Veena comes into this family, and you're absolutely right, she becomes the mainstay. Now, I think towards the end of the book, I actually have I've listed about 30 what I call of RK's life principles. These are the principles that he lived by, that he built his business by, that he operated his family by. It was one thing was intertwined with the next. The life principles of RK. And in those 30 life principles, he very much also talks about these kitchen politics, you know, and how conflict starts at home. Conflict in a business starts at home in the kitchen, because the kitchen is the domain of the daughters-in-law or the women in the household, you can say. And that was very much the case. So Veena was very much subjugated, bol sakte hain, you know, by the, you know, being the youngest daughter-in-law, you know, whether it's the mother-in-law, the elder daughters-in-law, that is what she felt, and suffocated. And it was not just her, the middle daughter-in-law also showed signs of feeling this way. So, you know, in many, many ways, she was Veena's sort of favorite sister-in-law because, you know, she empathized. Both of them empathized with each other, the plight of each other. But RK being the traditionalist, unka soch hamesha tha ke I'm never going to buck the trend. Jo main kar raha hu, I'm not doing for myself, I'm doing for my family. This is a family. Everything in the name of the family. We are the Malhotra family. So you know, bide your time, Veena. You do what it takes. You know, if my mother wants this, my mother wants this. So you can imagine how difficult that was for Veena. Because even if she felt that she's being shafted, for whatever reason, she doesn't have that husband taking her side in those early years. In those early years. Later on, things changed. By the late 60s, there was a lot of politics in the family, you know, constant conflict. At this point, the younger generation had been born. And this was really the root of what eventually would be the separation. It was issues of succession. The eldest brother, VP Malhotra, he and his wife could not have children for whatever reason. So they ended up adopting the second child of Mr. and Mrs. SN, the second brother. That was a male child. It turned out that Mr. and Mrs. SN never had any more male children. So these two brothers effectively were sharing a male descendant. Whereas RK and Veena had two male descendants. For a short while, there was a discussion कि उनका second son, उनको भी adopt किया, मतलब उनको भी adopt करना चाहिए VP से. But Mrs. VP had developed such love for her child that she actually rejected that idea, which was a boon and a blessing for Veena. She said, to see how the stars align. Because where would I have been? I would have been in depression for the rest of my life if I had been told, you know, to give up my son for adoption. She was already in depression at the thought of it, being, you know, that idea being weighed. So RK has two sons. VP and SN have one son. So Mr. HL Malhotra's assets, which would have needed to have been divided 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 amongst his three sons, those three sons are going to give 2/3 to the one male descendant. And yahan pe RK has to divide 1/6, 1/6. So this is where a lot of the problems began. By the end of the 60s, RK recognized that he needed to get out of Calcutta, partly because of the family problems, partly because his wife just couldn't take it. And as you rightly said, if there's problems with the wife at home, there is no question of him being able to leave the household in order to build this business, which he needs to do every single day. Be in factories, you know, develop sales, marketing, jo bhi hai, you know, to build the business. So he needed a happy wife. It sounds so simple, but it's so important, right? He needs a happy wife and a happy life at home. And there was another thing, Calcutta mein, there was the Naxalite movement was increasing. That made it difficult for any business with, factories and things in Calcutta. And he could not also get the requisite engineering talent in Calcutta. He was really struggling with this. So, whereas the engineering talent he seemed to be able to find was in Bombay. So all these reasons put together, a combination of factors led him to move to Bombay. But the Malhotras are such that, RK karega, hum baki log bhi karenge. Because, there can be no sense of entitlement or favoritism or, if Bombay is offering a better life for whatever reason, then who is one person to get it without the rest of us? So the other Malhotras also moved to Bombay. And that was the start of their business operations, really picking up. It wasn't the start, but really focusing on it from Bombay. 1970 was a very important year.
But in the 1960s, by the time the brand had established, or what were they operating?
So what had happened was they had gotten the franchise for Panama, which was a foreign brand, and they had begun to make blades under the name Panama from Thane in Bombay, actually, Thane. So before anything else, they were known as the Panama Wale Malhotra. In fact, when RK and Veena got married, literally they were known as Kaun se Malhotras? Haan, wo Panama Blade Wale Malhotra. That's what they were known for. And Panama was the start. Panama was still made of carbon steel, which is a lower quality steel. RK was in a race to make India's first stainless steel blade. The foreign brands had already begun making stainless steel blades outside, in foreign lands. And this was RK's dream to make the first stainless steel product. That's the higher quality blade. And he had put out by the late 60s a brand called Ashok, which was his sort of tester blade. And with the success of Ashok and the ability to sort of increase the quality, improve, the product and so forth, in 1970, from Bombay, they put out Topaz Stainless, which was the premium quality stainless steel product. And by 1973, Topaz became the #1 brand used in all of India. It was introduced into the Indian market. It sponsored programs that people saw on TV, Chaya Geet, Chitrahar. If you went into the movie theaters before you saw movies, a Topaz ad would play.
But this happened very quickly, though.
Very quickly. Kyunki RK, having moved to Bombay, he had some of his friends, this new community they were building, and contacts in the film industry. It wasn't called Bollywood in those days, but he leveraged those to sort of build awareness of the Topaz name. And those are the very, very early days of sort of marketing, the blade brands in this way. His brother SN quickly took over the marketing. So a lot of the TV programs and things and the movies and all after that, SN, organized, and the hoardings that you would see all over Bombay with, the blades and Topaz.
So when did the operation separate?
1970s, the decade was what I call the Topaz decade. The latter half of that decade, I would say that the Malhotras were not focused. RK had to go to England because his older son actually developed an eye problem, and he had to suddenly uproot his boys and put them in school in England because for medical treatment for his son. On the heels of that, what I just said a little bit earlier was that RK and Veena moved to Bombay in the late 60s. Dusre Malhotra log wo bhi Bombay ko shift gaye. Now RK has moved to England, so now that is perceived to be perhaps a better life, kyunki wo videsh hai, it's a foreign land, and Mr. and Mrs. HL were already living in England. That's why England actually came, that was the main go-to place, because Mr. and Mrs. HL were living in England. Mrs. HL had a health problem, and they were seeing doctors and taking medical treatment. Then that became sort of the place that Mr. HL Malhotra lived in till the end of his days. But VP and SN also decided to shift to England.
But भाइयों के बीच में भी झगड़ा होना start हुआ था?
बिल्कुल.
So this was in the late 1970s then?
Yeah, this is exactly. And even though the reasons were for medical treatment for RK's son, the perception is that you are just going because you want this better life. You want your children studying in foreign schools, तो हम भी ऐसे करेंगे. So both of the other brothers upped and moved to England, lock, stock and barrel, put their children in school there, and the whole family, moved to England. So this is where I say they became unfocused. It was a big problem for RK because he believed never move from your center of gravity. So he was de facto traveling between India and England.
But the other brothers were staying there.
They were there.
I'll try contextualizing and tell me if I'm right there. So here are the three brothers. These three brothers, by the late 60s, they've understood that there's an opportunity in the product. The youngest one, RK, understands that there's great opportunity if they move from carbon to stainless steel. He develops that product. He builds stainless steel blade and he calls that name Topaz.
Well, he didn't call it Topaz. SN's wife actually named it Topaz. The name Topaz was her idea.
There's another story that you've shared in the book, how RK always knew that he wanted to establish a brand, and those were the days when you could register a brand name without really starting or giving a product. So they would take a long list. We can make this, we can make this, we can make this. Eventually, at any point, if nobody else takes it, we'll go ahead and build one. So, what year are we saying that he started the brand Topaz?
1970.
1970.
Topaz was born August 1970.
So, in the late 1960s, let's say by 69, he shifts to Bombay. By the time operations in Calcutta are fluid, they understand how to make a blade. They've also somehow cracked through connections, through business, and through working and reworking the same business again and again, that there's an opportunity in stainless steel blade and how to go about it. RK understood that business. RK then decided that, there's a lot of muck that is happening. Calcutta, because of the Naxalite movement, they wanted to shift elsewhere. They shifted to Bombay. Other brothers flew in. RK, because of his personality and because of his very focused nature in business, he knew perhaps what advertising was. In the next 3 years, they make Topaz a household name in India.
Bilkul.
The magical years, where from 70s, 71, 72 to 73, 3 years it took for this man to make, to defeat Panama, Wilkinson, even Gillette, if it was in the market, I'm not sure. But to make it the biggest blade manufacturers or biggest or the household name in India. But then naturally those things are brewing up. The conflict within the family, the understanding that the assets will be divided unfairly, in a way unfairly, some would argue otherwise, whatever, unfairly. And everybody saw that, or everybody understood that RK was the one who was really hustling and building things up. And whatever RK and Veenaji's moves were, the others would follow, because by the time others in the family had sort of understood that the man, he's doing something right and he's got that insight, and if he's doing it, let's just go ahead and do it, because there may be or there may not be a conceited reason behind it. So in the early 1970s, they built Topaz as the biggest brand, with support of the three brothers essentially together building it. But in the second half of the 1970s, the conflicts begin to show up, and RK understands that in business it is important that your base does not shift very much.
बिल्कुल.
आप धंधा जहाँ कर रहे हो वहीं पे धंधे को बड़ा करो, उस जगह को नहीं छोड़ना, because all those people essentially understand, people relate you with the business that you're doing. Like you said, Malhotra, Panama wale Malhotra, and now in the early 1970s, Topaz wale Malhotra.
बिल्कुल.
And now, but what has happened is, because of a medical reason, the elders in the family had shifted to England. Back in the day, 60s and 70s, what we're talking about, India was going through a lot of its own crisis. England and UK essentially were seen as opportunities and countries jahan par sab kuch hai, facilities hai. So anybody of some metal or anybody who was doing anything good, because there are many people from Africa who were shifted out, and they had an opportunity to go to India, but they chose to go to England. So England गए वो, and RK, because of medical reasons, he had to be there, but he was followed by the two brothers and actually their wives. But RK kept coming back.
Correct. So RK didn't need to be there for medical reasons. RK's son.
RK's son.
Hanji. So, but RK was running these, trying to still grow and run these businesses in India. So he kept coming back. And again, this was a difficult time for the marriage between RK and Veena, because Veena bol rahi hai, how do you expect me to be here in England taking care of, at this point, 2 sons and a daughter, 3 children? So मैं अकेले में कैसे करूँगी? You know, and you just keep running off back to India. He, you know, so this bipolar man, insecure, again, he's just like, you have to understand. I have to be at the center of gravity. तो और कोई नहीं है. And she would be saying, but what about your brothers? This is supposed to be a family business. But they were at this point now trying to do all sorts of other things. Mr. VP, he was exploring pehle blades business in Africa, then some other businesses. The blades business failed because the smuggling of blades through the upper Volta channels into Africa, the smuggled blades were being sold at a cheaper price than the blades that he was trying to manufacture through joint ventures and things. So wo bhi phus ho gaya. A lot of Mr. HL's money going to fund all of this was going waste. He was getting really upset that his hard-earned money had stopped working at this point, you know, but is being depleted. So again, family dissonance.
In terms of money, where did Mr. HL make his money?
So Mr. HL made his money in all of these small sundry businesses that he was experimenting with before they started blades. And then when he essentially used that to fund the blades business. Okay. So the early blades business, you know, when it took off, he was very much operational, established it, handed it over to his sons, which is why the main company was called HLM and Sons, and that is still the name of the company that is owned and was inherited by the elder 2 brothers. Initially all 3 brothers, but then RK was thrown out of that. So it was VP and SM. And Mr. HL sort of took his lock stock, retired, said, "Mera theek hai, ye bahut hai mere liye," and invested it and sort of lived off of that for the rest of his lives. And his sons continued to run the business. But when they came to England, he was still sort of funding them in bits and pieces for these new things they wanted to do. But they were depleting his supplies and he was not earning anymore. So he was upset by this. And there was a big blowout in the latter half of the 1970s where he got really angry, and RK and Veena walk in on a scene where he is literally screaming at Mr. VP, and it's a nasty situation. And RK, being this youngest, again, very traditionalist, Malhotra ke nahi, mera bada bhai sahab jo hai VP, I have to save his hide. I have to help him. I have to support him. And then he goes to Africa, works on this deal which he thought was wasting his own time. But still, they wanted color TVs in Africa for the first national broadcast sometime in the 70s. And RK worked overtime to get this done, to earn back the money that had been depleted from Mr. HL's reserves and fund Mr. HL's bank accounts, so to speak. And that's exactly what he did, and keep the peace, between father and the sons. And it was a very important thing for him to do this. And bilkul unhone isi cheez kiya. But he went to his father and he said, okay, chalo, I've brought this money back for you. How about giving me some of it? This is RK's thing. Even when he was in college, he was doing management consultancy projects. He would ask, because they were working for, you could call it an internship or whatever, for Marks and Spencer and Boeing. And then he would ask for commission. He said, you're going to apply my methodology that I've been working on, how about giving me some of the commission? This was RK's habit. So the same thing, he asked his father, give me some of the commission. His father said, nothing doing. This is my money. You go back. I've given razor blades to you all. Now go run it. So family dissonance and this issue of we must split, we are not getting along, came full on in the late 70s. And by the time, They all got back to India in the late 70s, you could say by 1980, okay? They had begun to really think of ways to separate. How are we going to separate? It took 4 or 5 years to actually do the separation, but it was a full matlab on their agenda from 1980 onwards, I would say.
Brothers के बीच में झगड़े का कारण, was it becoming what was happening in kitchen politics? Was that a major reason or no?
That was also definitely a major reason because, again, if you remember, I mentioned these two brothers
didn't have a voice.
Yes, exactly. They were sharing this one son. So, of course, the kitchen politics, the mothers, everything must go to him.
So, all of that was just really coming out in the business.
Exactly.
But did the brothers then come back to India or
They came back. The biggest asset at that point
was HML Sons.
HLM and Sons. But what did it produce was that Topaz blade, right? And that had become
a brand.
The brand, the only brand, the biggest brand. And all of the Malhotra factories, when I say all now, because at this point you're talking about factories in Calcutta, which are the flagship. And then you're talking about the factory in Thane, which is actually not a factory, but it's an R&D center. There's a big difference because an R&D center cannot produce at the capacity that a factory can. It does not have that license. And they had bought a factory called Indo Swing in Hyderabad, which was a joint venture between Ashok Desai, whose father was the defense minister. Not the defense minister, but in the ministries of defense. And that was a collaboration with Swing Blade, which was another foreign brand. So Malhotras had bought that. And they had bought some other lands and things around Hyderabad as well. Because the idea is like, we've bought ye jo hai Indo Swing, now let's build around that, and expand. So Topaz was being made in all these factories, in these different states. But the same brand. Topaz.
उस टाइम पे Topaz की production कितनी थी? If you have any...
I don't remember exactly, but it was hefty and it was the largest. I don't, to be honest.
In terms of numbers, in terms of capital?
Yeah. Well, let's just say it commanded 80% of the market.
But they were commanding 80% of the market.
Yes, 80% of the market, actually plus 80, beyond 80.
And there's operations in Calcutta, Bombay, Thane
and in Hyderabad, primarily these places. And there is a big problem with the Monopolies Commission.
Okay.
Because monopolies, exactly, in India are not allowed with any product, any brand, any family, any business, any company.
And in 5 years, Topaz had become
Exactly. And Topaz, not just Topaz, but Malhotras kya karte the? They would have different brands. So Topaz was the main brand, but even for lower, so that was being sold at a higher price. But even for the lower price sectors, we still have to dominate. So Ashok or other brands, matlab those will command in the lower price sectors.
So three primary brands.
Bilkul. So they had started off with Bharat and Panama, then there was Ashok, then there was Topaz. So in all the different sectors of the market, they commanded with whatever the blade was for that particular sector of the market. And RK, his belief was that I must always be able to control the entire market because I must make a product that every single man can use, highest quality, lowest possible price. How do you do that? The only way you can do that is through vertical engineering in RK's head. So I control the machines which make this blade. I control that part of the process. And I also make the raw material which makes the blade. Because pehle zamane mein, they were reliant on Hitachi Steel, British Steel and Sandvik. These three steel suppliers, all of which are outside of India. So you can imagine, when there are import licenses and things established, over the course of years, import restrictions, I should say, then the price becomes very expensive, unaffordable. So RK said, no, I have to produce a high quality product at a lowest possible price. So uske liye I have to manufacture my own steel raw material as well that is used to then make the blade. So this is what he did. He commanded the steel rolling process, which becomes the raw material and makes the machines and makes the eventual end product as well for different sectors of the market. So Monopolies Commission, this case went on for years, for years. Now, RK was a very dynamic man, but he had not been trained legally. And he realized, although perhaps he didn't vocalize in those days, कि legal or finance उनके strong points बिल्कुल नहीं थे. But when they were arguing against the Monopolies Commission, he would go and represent himself in court. It was not a lawyer that was representing him. Or when they did bring in other lawyers, he would still go with the lawyer, stand in the court and represent himself as well.
Legal काम SN के पास था?
None of them were lawyers. Lekin over the course of time, SN took on the responsibility of legal. Took it under his wing. Which was a very smart maneuver for him. Again, you can imagine that, in a family, there are conflicts and, legal is everything. So that was also how eventually, what Mr. HL does, because of the ladai jhagda amongst the three sons, HL says, chalo ho gaya, enough is enough, you need to separate. That was a shock to RK's system that my own father is telling me this. Shouldn't he be supporting me? In his head, support means, chalo beta log, everybody, calm down, make up and run this together. RK is a traditionalist. But HL basically said, no, you can't work together, you split. Remember, HL had split from his own brother. He and his own brother had split from the first brother. So this, understanding that this is how, eventually you split, that was already in the DNA. तो HL ने कहा अपने बच्चों को कि you all manufacture Topaz, because that was the big question. What about Topaz? What about Topaz? It was simple to say other brands, तुम ये लो, तुम ये ले लो, लेकिन Topaz was like the big brand. And HL ने कहा, okay, it's being produced in all these factories. You guys take Indo Swing, elder brothers take Indo Swing in Hyderabad, and you take the Calcutta factories. RK is in Bombay, he can take Thana factory, and we'll give him some of the other lands that are still being built in Hyderabad. Okay? This was a big bone of contention because, as I said, the factory in Bombay was not a factory, it was an R&D center. And according to RK, matlab dusre factories in Hyderabad were not factories at that point, they were just land and a few tin sheds. So he says, I was given barren land that I had to build from scratch with no money, practically. Or HL ne kaha, all three of you will manufacture Topaz. That's going to be split 2/3, 1/3. And RK ne kaha, but Papa, ye kaise hoga? Daddy, ye kaise hoga? And Daddy ne unko kaha tha ke, don't worry, you will have the rights to manufacture Topaz for the rest of your life, RK. RK went to see the lawyers. Lawyers reassured him, ke, don't worry, Mr. Malhotra, you have the rights to manufacture Topaz for the rest of your life. Lekin wo understanding, there's a chapter in my book called The Wobbly MOU, because it was literally that. A feeble MOU made by hand on blank paper that in the courts of law meant little to nothing, and became a big problem years later. So, Vishwas par, on faith, bato mein, this is not how you do business. This is not how you split assets.
So here's RK was in that conflict zone because ek taraf he wants to operate with that Punjabi household mindset ke papa ne bola hai waisa hi karna hai.
Bilkul.
And on the other side, he's also a businessman who understands the tricks of the trade, or who perhaps understands how to get deals done, because he's built businesses, he's saved those deals in Africa. How is this playing out then?
So what happens now is you've got two Topazes in the market. You've got Topaz made by RK in Bombay, in Thane, and you've got Topaz made by VP and Ascent in Calcutta. RK used to call them A group and I am B group, because again, traditionalist. Ki bade bhai is A and I am B. So literally in the family household, matlab the RK family household, and in the RK business organization, his staff and peers would call them A group and hum hai B group. A Group ke blade and B. So A Group had Topaz in the market, which came to be known as Calcutta Topaz. And B Group had this Bombay Topaz. तो पहले काफी confusion था market में. Stockist dealers बोल रहे थे कि ये क्या है, दो किस्म के Topaz और एक किस्म का मतलब उनका quality inferior है compared to this one. That was very clear. And of course, RK's quality was top. He was the engineer, right? But he was struggling and not being able to produce to capacity. Jugad, he took this into his own hands, made executive decisions, and he said, "Main kya karunga? I am going to make blades. I'm going to put them in the Indian market, but I need cash. This is not enough cash for me. I'm going to put them on containers and I'm going to ship them abroad. And in order to do that, maybe I have to produce beyond the capacity. And who is going to question me if I send these goods abroad? Because that means money is coming back, foreign exchange into this country. This is what this country needs. Who is going to question me?" This is what RK did. This is exactly what he did. And he said the other thing, he says, "Aise abhi I have been given this promise to manufacture Topaz for the rest of my days, lekin the time is going to come fairly quickly jab mere bhai bas wo rok denge ye sab kuch. They are going to put the kibosh on it aur main Topaz manufacture nahi kar sakunga. So what do I have to do? I have to build up another brand coming out of my companies. My company is called Vidyut Metallics Limited. That is the company that the Thane operations were operating under." And he said, so the first thing I have to do is get people to understand कि ये दो blade है Topaz. This particular Topaz is coming from Vidyut. That's my Topaz. I have to get them to understand that. तो उन्होंने क्या किया? On the packaging, his Topaz packaging, he began to print the word Vidyut in the font, logo type. And with each successive packaging print, he just increased the size of that font and increased the size and increased. So that became to be known Vidyut Topaz. Vidyut Topaz and Calcutta Topaz, or Vidyut Topaz and ordinary Topaz. And he said, this is good because next time another product comes out of Vidyut, they will have associated it with the Vidyut brand. This was his thinking. And he had registered, jo maine pehle kaha, they used to register names and brands. And he had very clean under his own name, the brand Supermax. Why was it under his name? Because Supermax was never initially intended to be a double-edged blade, which is the biggest, blade in the market. It was being developed in the R&D center for the shaving systems. Pehle tha twin track, uske baad, in later years, triple, quadruple, etc. But the Gillette style, you can say. Shaving systems for a higher sector of the market. And Supermax was supposed to be developed as for that, the first sandwich blade, that you put in the razor. So, but because he had it, he said, I'm going to manufacture Supermax as a double edge. And he started doing that, and with every brand sort of carton of his Topaz that he would put into the market, he would just lagao extra free Supermax just to get the market to try it out. The stockists, the dealers, and long and short of it, there comes this day after a series of court cases and going to from the local courts, district courts to superior courts to high court, supreme, back, aage, piche, appeals, everything. Finally comes the day that RK is been given a court order that you are no longer able to manufacture Topaz. He says orchestrated by A Group, but whatever, that day came and there was a container of Vidyut Topaz out to Dubai. It had reached Dubai, so crossed international borders, and it was recalled, which legally is not allowed. Once any goods cross into international waters, they're not allowed to be recalled, but it was done. That container, interestingly enough, till today is sitting somewhere with custom seal around it. Do not touch. God knows what rusted state it's in, itne saalon ke baad. Lekin what seemed overnight, when I say that now, it did not seem like it at that time. Supermax just takes off. And overnight, RK has gone from Topaz to Supermax. This is probably the most dynamic, cinematic story of how he did this jugad and went from this brand to this brand, and just in a very short amount of time, Supermax is now number one in the Indian market. That becomes RK's legacy brand at that point when he's on lows, because he was always struggling still with finance. His brothers then are trying to outwit him and somehow with their kind of lagaud pressure get the Supermax brand back into their hands. That didn't happen. Thank gosh. But this is the story of RK. It's crazy. It's crazy.
So what has happened now? So Topaz is being manufactured still by the Calcutta one?
So Topaz, interestingly...
Because we eventually talk about that there's capital crunch and then people sell shares.
At some point, after it was out of RK's hands, Supermax was doing better now than Topaz. So A Group de facto killed their own brand, destroyed, their own brand to build up their other brands, better than Topaz. They had now got new brands and stuff into the market because they did no longer wanted to be associated with Topaz, because there was this, wo RK Saab ka hai, lekin ye abhi RK Saab ka Supermax hai. So they just wanted to disassociate. So Topaz actually was stopped and killed. But then at a later point in time, I think they brought it back into the market. There you do find some Topaz now in the market, but it is only used by barbers for shaving sideburns. So barbers भी वो भी मतलब low quality blade इस्तेमाल करते हैं for sideburns and higher quality for the facial contours. They also have their own hierarchy and segregation. And from what I understand now, that's all it's being used for. Which is a new Topaz.
So what is that? New Topaz is still by Calcutta?
Yes. They own the rights to it. Yes.
They own the rights to manufacture and operate Topaz. And RK's legacy is Supermax.
RK's legacy is Supermax, but by the time RK passed away, he did not own Supermax. What happened in the 1990s, the full decade of the 1990s, going into early 2000s, Gillette was trying to buy RK for a good 10 years plus. And it didn't happen. But the negotiations, the price they offered, they doubled that offer. RK was in a bipolar low. He was struggling. He actually wanted to sell because he felt ke bahut ho gaya. I need money in the system. It was not easy for him to even though he was selling goods abroad. And Supermax at that point, I'll give you the numbers because Supermax numbers, though I know much better, 5 million plus blades a year. And in 80 plus countries, Supermax had become the number one blade, not just in India, but in the entire world by volume. Gillette has always been number one by value, price. But Supermax at that point was number one by volume. And largest markets were Africa and the Middle East, UK. In those countries, their population go to Medina, Makkah, Hajj, they shave. So outside of India, it was that shaving market for the Islamic pilgrimages, which, had the number one demand. So RK wanted to sell to Gillette. I was a college student in America in those days, and I remember him calling practically in tears, because it was difficult for him to get that money back into the country with delays of export payments and things like that. And he was always worried, okay, this is going to be a FERA regulation. I'm going to be jailed tomorrow morning if I don't bring the money back into the country. So he was, and as a bipolar man, when you get into that depression, it just takes you over, the mental health issues. But interestingly enough, at that point, his wife and two sons did not want to sell to Gillette, did not want to sell out. And they stopped that. They opposed that. Baad mein jo hua, by 2010, 2011, he was made an offer by Actis, a UK private equity firm. And they made a big cash injection into the business, but then they eventually took it over, not even eventually, very quickly. In a couple of years, they had taken over, diluted down the family shares, and that was the end of RK's association with razor blades.
So when they diluted down the family shares, how was it in terms of business strategy? Was it, and because we're talking family and business together, it's important. So See, you may feel associated with the brand because your father's built it. He spent his entire life building the brand. My question here is that here he needs capital infusion. Capital infusion comes in from a private equity. And both your brothers and sons of the family, RK's sons have sort of taken over. They are practically part of the business, I'm assuming, and they perhaps have an idea about the legal frameworks and how to ensure that they are not taken for granted. So how does that happen?
Unfortunately, this is not a Cinderella story. It is not. The moment Actis came in, RK was out, and Rajiv, his second son, was out.
Okay, as soon as
they were out. So that was the end of their days of association with the razor blades. And these are two people who had literally built it with their hands. RK, of course, we've been talking about. But Rajiv, his son, also was the factory man who has spent more nights and days and nights in those factories than arguably any other member besides RK himself. So now the problem, and a couple of years later, the other brother, the RK's other son, was also out. So Actis took over, lock, stock and barrel. They hired Hindustan Lever staff and to run the operations, and Supermax was a totally different company. Now, I had interviewed a lot of staff, workers and things very deeply in order to write this book, because I had to get a very, very deep understanding, exactly, again, beyond the emotion, as you say, of being in the family and the brand is ours and all that. So here was the big sort of problem, is that perhaps with the best of intentions, they had hired Hindustan Lever staff, but Hindustan Lever sales organization does not have salespeople, they have account executives. That is a big difference. Here, Supermax was a wholesale product.
Many Punjabi businesses from the 60s, 70s, 80s are obsessed over salespeople. Salesmen, sales.
Bilkul.
Not as obsessed. I've heard of stories of people who've been obsessed that we need more salespeople. Account excs, very important, but one account executive. I'm the boss. I can manage the accounts, but I need more salespeople and need people who can do it and who can manage those sales operations.
You have hit the nail on the head. So it's all very well and easy to say, कि चलो private equity आएगा, cash infusion आएगा, capital infusion, लेकिन business कैसे चलेगा? And RK could see this happening under his eyes, and there was nothing he could do about it because he had totally lost control of the business, you know. And he, in that last decade of his life, he actually went back to building industrial blades, which was the early business he had tried to build and couldn't. So life comes full circle. But he and Raju were doing that. But he was so upset that because see, that double-edged blade was the true love of his life. That was his love, his lover, his wife, his child, his mother, his father, his family, his spirit, his soul. And if he was separated from that, he had nothing. This is not a man who said, chalo, abhi, I'm going to retire and play golf and bridge and nahi, bilkul nahi.
Punjabi man.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, in those last few days that, I would talk to him also and others also, he would be saying, he'd be doing the calculations, ki itne mahine mein, it's over. Itne hafton mein, it's over. 21 din mein, it's over. And we would sort of not take him seriously. But that's exactly what happened. Today, there's no Supermax. There's nothing left. This is RK's legacy. It's not a Cinderella story. It's, if you look at,
And what happened to Topaz?
Topaz, like I said,
is the family still operating that business, or they also
they do have a blades business, but the operations have been whittled down significantly, next to nothing. They are almost just very, very, I don't know what the percentages are, but very, very minor in the market.
But still, the HLM.
They have a company called HLM.
Okay, and they're manufacturing blades.
Yeah.
But when it was winding down, and I tend to see it this way. See, every business has a time of that. Every business has this opportunity. You can one just like that people were obsessed over law, then people were obsessed over engineering, then people were obsessed over economics, then people were obsessed over public policy. Every business has a right time in the larger, post-Renaissance period of history. They see peak and then it dwindles down. Or when it dwindles down, family businesses show a tendency to venture out into different streams. What RK did remarkably well was moving from Topaz to Supermax without, he himself or his family or his part of business taking a huge hit. When they were winding down operations of Supermax or when they were being bought out, and here's this man who's spent his entire life struggling with cash flows, right? I mean, you may have money at home, you may have money, you may have made enough money through business and operations, and the family is sort of in the sense full. But in terms of running operations, he's shared and have had to go through a bit of his own crisis time and again. But a man who understands this, when the operations were dwindling down or when they were being stepped out or they had to step out, what did this occur to the family? Okay, perhaps this is the time. It's been a good ride. Let's find another business. And I understand they went into industrial blades, but any other business did they feel like venturing out? Because family businesses, if they want to grow in India and they want to surpass multiple generations, they have to venture out very quickly and perhaps shift into or diversify as well. So did RK plan this, or was this anywhere in the cards?
So it's a great question. See, RK was this man who believed that the only business I can be in must be that of a strong product that I can control and a competitor can't come in. And, anybody can come in, but they don't have the edge that RK, have. So for him, it was only steel, it was only blades. He did not think of anything else. And he was initially, right after the Actis acquisition, he was gung-ho ke main ye badhaunga, main business chalaunga, it's going to be industrial blades, this blade, that blade. He was gung-ho, but it was not necessarily what his son or grandsons wanted at the time.
Okay.
So, and he was not willing to look at anything else. Remember back in the days of Helena Rubinstein, he said this cosmetics is a weak business. At one point, I had wanted to do an Ayurvedic business and he said, weak products. This is strong. Because he was very, just my way or hit the highway kind of man. So, he didn't look into anything else.
So he's very different from his father who was trying multiple
Correct.
things.
Very, very different.
He's clear that this is what I want to do. Yeah. If not this, then I'm not doing it.
Yes, exactly. And fortunately or unfortunately, I won't get into this too much. His eldest son, who there was conflict with, he decided to start a blades business, which there were issues with because just with the agreement with Actis, that was not okay. But piche se RK is like just thinking blade, so all of a sudden, he's like, thinking blade, but
blade was part of your drawing room conversations.
Exactly. It was just part of his DNA. He just couldn't shake it from his system. So there was no question of him looking at anything else.
So we've discussed throughout, a lot of RK's journey and picked many of these lessons. Any other lessons that you think that we perhaps may have missed out? Then share some anecdotes first as to, business is a tricky thing to be in, and there's always this competition. There must be some stories of how he may have dealt with, or the family may have dealt with. Share some stories for our audience.
In terms of how he
or anybody in the extended family, like the Malhotras, dealt with a competitor or ensured that they...
Right. So I'll tell you this story. These all could be contentious.
Sure, but contentious is the way RK operates his business.
One is when they wanted to buy the Indoswing factory from the Desais, Ashok Desai. There was a race to buy this factory. It was rumored in the market, it's up for sale. And so some of the other competitors perhaps wanted to also acquire it. Malhotras were very keen to acquire it. And however, they wanted to negotiate on the price. They thought that it was not being offered at the price they wanted. So how can I bring this story to you? What are the words I want to use? It was found out while they were doing their due diligence a few days later in the market that, you see, the base paper that is used to wrap the blade, and this at a time when stainless steel technology is still being developed and improved, okay? The base paper with a certain, if it's exposed to certain chemicals or materials or coatings or, can cause rust. So during the negotiation with Indoswing owners, it is found out in the market that a lot of the Indoswing blades are rusted. So naturally, when that kind of thing happens, the value of Indoswing suddenly falls. And the Malhotras see this as a golden opportunity and seize in and buy it at their desired price. That's a story that comes to mind. Coincidental story that comes to mind.
So was it always planned, or tell me, were Malhotras involved in ensuring that this chemical, that base paper or that rusting happens?
Now, I wasn't in the room, so I couldn't tell you precisely. But I will say that this is a Malhotra trait that has carried through years later. If you fast forward to the 90s, when Gillette is trying their best to buy Supermax at that point, you're finding Supermax being found in the market with a tampered base paper, causing it to rust. So this tactic, once discovered, plays through later on as well. Mm-hmm. क्योंकि अगर वो खराब है, उसका क्वालिटी खराब है, तो हमारे ही ब्लेड ऊपर उठेगा ना. So that is just one kind of example that comes through. That
any other way to derail any bidder?
A bidder. Yes, absolutely. There are definitely other ways to derail. Even if I go back to the times of Panama, Ripu Daman Bhagat was the distributor for Panama. He had his eyes on the franchise. He wanted to go and establish an alliance with Herr Court in Solingen, Germany. And he flies to Dusseldorf. H.L. Malhotra gets wind of this and says, there is no way, because H.L. Malhotra was very active in those days. And he says, I need to get there first. So he orders his sons to arrange for facilities in Dusseldorf to keep Ripu Daman Bhagat busy with wine, women, and song. And the story goes that Ripu Bhagat arrives on a Friday with full intention to get to Solingen by the next day. But it was a Friday, and he decided to stay the weekend with wine, women, and song, because, these three factors were very interesting, to him. He gets to Solingen on Monday morning, only to find out that HL arrived there on the Saturday, got there first, negotiated the deal. He's too late.
Good one. Any other stories from RK's life that before we close our conversation, anything that you'd like to share, or any lessons? Because you've shared at the later part of the book. I'd like you to, here's a copy, I'd like you to read through a few of those lessons.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So the life principles of RK are what you find at the very end of the book on page 382. And it was my brother Rajiv primarily, but also with the help of my nephew Rohan, who helped me just really put these down, because RK in his hand wrote a letter to Rohan, handwriting some of these life principles. And Rajiv keeps coming up with them. Even now, he says, in fact, what 30? There's so many more. I said, okay, hold your horses. There are other books. These could be a self-help book, But RK truly believes that because he has faced so much adversity in his own life, that the number one thing he always says is, when adversity strikes, do not look in the rear view mirror, because the traffic lies ahead. And Rajiv, his son, would say that, while he agrees with it, he also takes some umbrage and argues with him, because he says to his father that if I didn't look in the rear view mirror, then how do I even see RK Malhotra? So, it's all relative. And then the other one that, really comes to mind is Principle 29, where he says, in the realm of legal conflict, remember, it takes a triad of laws to triumph. Each one, vital in its own right, forms a formidable force together. Number 1, statutory law, which are the written rules. Number 2, common law, the unwritten wisdom. And number 3, jungle law, which is the unspoken reality. So meaning you've got to do whatever it takes to get to your goal. Whatever it takes. Building businesses lie in how do I get through those loopholes. Which leads me to his life principle number 2, which I don't even know. Sometimes I ask, this should have been number 1, because this is the one thing for all of us, it's like, what does Mr. RK say? This is the one line that, immediately comes, to our fingertips, where RK says, success in life is 99% luck and 1% pure bloody good luck. Now, you might say to me, Renita, that means that RK is a man who just thinks that jo hoga so hoga. Luck and 1% bloody good luck. But what RK is actually trying to say is, if you don't do what it takes to get into the room, you're never going to be able to manifest that 99%. And you need that 99% in order to be able to capitalize on that 1%. So for RK, it's about manifestation. Don't take lightly what he says, because, सब कुछ अपने ही हाथों में, अपने ही काबू में लेना ही चाहिए. अगर नहीं लिया, then how are you going to get to that 99%, which will find you, but that 1% which will save you.
Lovely. I think we had a great chat, a lot of learning, great time discussing RKG's life with you, a lot of learning lessons. And I'm sure many people who are watching us, I'm sure we'll put out snippets here, क्योंकि बहुत सारी चीजें हैं जो इस कहानी के अंदर हैं. And I'm sure जो भी लोग सुन रहे हैं, जो भी लोग देख रहे हैं, they'll thoroughly enjoy it. And I wish you very well. Congratulations, you've done an incredible job in documenting it, because it does not feel like you're just reading the story of a business. It feels like you're actually understanding the Indian Punjabi household and how operations happen there. What are the conflicts? What's happening within the family? How, and perhaps lessons also, because people invest so much of their time and energy in their lives building a brand. And here's a man who's built it twice, right? And you spend so much of effort in building that thing, and then when the next generation comes in, there's always this conflict that is following. So perhaps a lesson there. But then congratulations, Renita ji, for doing such a remarkable job.
Thank you.
I've had the privilege of hosting you here, privilege of getting into this conversation and learning so much from you, and hope to exchange more letters and more messages.
I would love to. Thank you so much for having me on the show. This has been such a stimulating conversation, a very important one for me, and I would love to be in touch, exchange letters, ideas,
Notes on the next book.
Notes on the next book, and things that really drive this country forward.
Please do read Ace of Blades, written by Renita Malhotra Huraji. Now, it's out there on Amazon and all the platforms that you can buy from. It's published by Jayco. Thank you very much.